Meeting is now streaming live on Facebook.
Ooh, exciting. Awesome. Well, I guess as people are starting to enter, we can go ahead and tentatively get started. Um, but before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of this thing, I just want to say thank you to a few people. I just want to say thank you, obviously, to Dr. Nab and Saxophone Studio Online for such an amazing medium to bring us all together right now, as well as all of the Committee on the Status of Women for seeing value in this discussion, in the content that's going to be addressed here, and for bringing that to people's attention. And then also, I'd like to thank all of the panelists for being so generous with their time. For some of them, it's been like this is the third iteration after an interview, after the discussion being held at NASA. So thanks to all of the lovely panelists for being very generous with their time. Why don't we go ahead and have everyone on the panel go around and introduce themselves? I mean, I'm sure everyone knows you all because you all are fabulous, but it would probably be for formality's sake. Who wants to start? Nick, go ahead. You're top left on my screen, so.
Sure. My name's Nick Zoulek. Thanks so much for having me. I'm a saxophonist. I compose, and I'm currently the communications manager for 8th Blackbird.
Okay, Jess.
Okay, I'm next. All right, so I'm Jess Voigt Page. I'm one of the saxophone faculty at Baylor University. I'm also the director and founder in Saxophone Academy Austin here in Austin. I'm also your president-elect for NASA, so that's really fun. And, I do a bunch of other things, but I also work with other musicians to help talk about careers and entrepreneurship and career development.
Awesome. Kristen.
Hello, I'm Kristen McKeon, and I am the brand and product manager for D'Addario Woodwinds. At least I was. We're currently in a bit of a furlough situation. Kind of an interesting time for me to be having this discussion. But in addition to my work at D'Addario, I'm also a chamber musician. I play with the New Thread Saxophone Quartet and do a lot of volunteer work on behalf of women's advocacy groups in different professional music groups. The North American Saxophone Alliance, CSW, also the Smart Women in Music organization that is hosted by NAM, the National Association of Music Partners.
Awesome. And Dr. Evan?
Sure. Hi, I'm Noah Evan. I have been teaching at Kent State University for the last 7 years. I've been on faculty there teaching saxophone and co-directing new music ensemble. I actually just got my first full-time teaching job at Rowan University, where I'll be starting in September. In Cleveland, I think 3 years ago, I co-founded a nonprofit organization called Cleveland Uncommon Sound Project that promotes new music, and we started a festival called Resound. And I'm also a member of 2 duos, Patchwork, which is a saxophone and drum set duo, and Oniswano, which is a saxophone duo with Phil Pierick.
Awesome. So I think that's everyone. I don't want to talk about myself because I'm not sure there's a lot to say. But what I did want to just kind of briefly touch on before I kind of started feeding questions to the panelists related to this topic is kind of to just understand why, what is the germinating, the point of origin for this discussion? What do I mean by, beyond the DMA? So just unpacking that a little bit. If you've read the description about this, I included a quote by Brene Brown that scarcity thrives in a culture where everyone is hyper aware of lack. And so I think specifically with the way that what we engage with in the arts, I think that we are bombarded with scarcity and notions of scarcity quite a lot, specifically depending on what career path you're engaging with, like what your occupational trajectory is. I think you can deal with notions of scarcity from pretty early on, if we're thinking about jobs that are available to us, like a teaching position, those jobs don't really fluctuate in numbers. There are the number of jobs that there are, and then the availability changes as people enter and leave the occupation. And then if we're looking at, say, a performance opportunity with a military band, those numbers are pretty set by standard instrumentation. And so I think it's really easy to be sucked into a notion of scarcity with what we do. And so that's why I was thinking a lot about diversity. We're having conversations about diversity a lot, both in our organizations, externally as a country, in our various communities, and diversity as an intersectional idea, right? Like diversity is not just a thing, it intersects with so many different notions. And so here looking at occupational diversity, how looking at occupations with that lens can help us tackle the notion of scarcity. And so what I love about this panel, and all the people who I've spoken with, even though this panel doesn't encompass all of them, is that they address scarcity really kind of in two big ways. They've tackled scarcity either by choosing not to pursue a terminal degree and instead choose to essentially placemake, innovate, create something where a model did not exist before, or others who have chosen to address scarcity kind of by moving the focus of their artistic pursuits outside of academic music making and collaborating heavily with artists not only outside of saxophone and a saxophone-centric workspace, but also in general just outside of music. I mean, just engaging with artists through a multitude of genres and mediums. And that's kind of what I love about this panel. So that's kind of my starting place for why I thought this was an important conversation to have. And so I guess you all didn't really tune into this to hear me speak, and so let me kind of start funneling some questions to the panelists. Obviously, you all have that chat there as a tool. I promise we'll save time at the end, and we will get to questions. So let me start with a question for Jess Voigt Page. I had the privilege of talking to you last summer, and you talked about kind of a business venture that you had right outside of your master's degree, and how it informed you, I guess informed your pursuit of entrepreneurial activities and how to apply entrepreneurship into what we do as musicians. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and what that showed you?
Yeah, sure. It's I talked about this at our NASA presentation, but for anyone who didn't hear that, it's a little bit of a strange story. I actually started outside of when I graduated. I moved to Colorado with my husband, and I didn't really have a job. There wasn't really work there. It was a very small town, and the private teaching scene was very small. So I had a hard time kind of breaking into that realm of what I do. So I actually ended up teaching myself a lot about how to create an Etsy store. And so I made handbags and earrings on Etsy for a good 6 months. Taught myself a lot of things practically about how to sew and what it meant to, make labels and things, which is really fun. And for any of you who see what I do, I still like to sew. So it's fun to kind of have that skill now that I can do that. But what I found really interesting about that experience with Etsy was that because it wasn't saxophone related, I actually had a lot of freedom to just kind of do what I wanted, knowing that there wasn't, I could have done a lot more research about how to do everything as a business owner and everything as part of that. But I knew that there wasn't really anyone telling me that I couldn't do it, or like there's one right way to do it and one wrong way to do it. And so I just was like, you know what, let's see what happens. I'm trying to make some extra money, trying to figure out, just how to entertain myself at the same time, keep my creative juices flowing. And so I just kind of dug into it, and I didn't sell a ton of things. I sold enough that I had to file taxes. So that was good. But, it was really interesting because it gave me a lot of freedom to create and to explore and to test a lot of things out, to see what worked and what didn't from a business perspective. And I'd never really thought of running a business before. I'd had music teaching experience I've been teaching since 2006. So, a long time in Australia. But I never really thought of it as, oh, hey, I'm going to apply my business skills or apply a business mindset to my teaching. And so doing that Etsy store actually kind of opened my brain up to be like, oh, hey, I can do this with something that I'm not particularly good at. Imagine what happens if I apply this way of thinking to the thing that I am good at. And so when we moved to Austin, I really experimented with that and threw myself into that and thought, okay, how can I run this studio as business? What can I take from what I learned with my little Etsy store, and how can I kind of scale that up to be, in music, in teaching, and somewhere where I know there is an interest and a need for the work that I can do really well. What can I take from that business to apply there? And it was one of those things that the more I started experimenting with it, the more I realized that if I apply more of a business mentality to my teaching, then my teaching is going to get better and my business as a teacher is going to get better, and then I can do more. And so that's where things kind of expanded from, is that freedom to actually experiment and to create and to not be afraid of trying new things and pivoting when needed to. Kyle, I lost you.
I know, I'm sorry. I was struggling very hard with the unmute button. You'd think after all this time on Zoom, I would have mastered that by now. So how do you think that because, business talks a lot about entrepreneurship. How do you think that entrepreneurship differs for us than it does maybe from someone who's talking about this in some sort of business mindset? I mean, how does entrepreneurship look different for us for what we do?
I think that anyone else can jump in on this question too. For me, having an entrepreneurial mindset within music, it's more than just knowing how to run a business, and it's more than just starting one. It's more than just saying, I'm going to do this venture and I'm going to make this happen, and like, here are the steps to do it. It's actually more about the application of that entrepreneurial way of thinking to the things that you do and to the things that are that specialty thing that you can offer the world. So I view entrepreneurship as it's a mindset, it's a skill set, it's a lot more than just a word. It's, we throw it around like it's some kind of buzzword of like, you can't do entrepreneuring. You can apply the entrepreneurial mindset to the ventures and things that you're working on, or the projects that you're working on, and the skills that you develop through that creativity and through that experimentation and just all of the different skill sets that we learn in studying entrepreneurship. I think that's where the value is for us as musicians. It's not so much about, can you start a business from scratch and get some venture capitalist funding and get an angel investor or anything like that. If you want to go that way, then you absolutely can. But I think the value actually comes with us for us in project-based entrepreneurship, rather than necessarily the large-scale things for everyone. I'm not sure if that's 100% answer to the question, but I am interested to see what everyone else says to that too.
Yeah, I mean, this is a panel, and I certainly want everyone to feel like that they can jump in. So if anyone has anything to riff off of that, I mean...
I can jump in actually on that a little bit. I agree with Jess wholeheartedly that a project-based approach to an entrepreneurial, we'll say, journey or entrepreneurial lifestyle. I also suggest that it's as much of a mindset as it is a skill set at some point. And in my work at D'Addario, which is very much a business corporation, we still take a project-based approach to how we plan out our calendar year. There's always larger goals that we have. There's make enough money to eat this week, make enough money to get through a year, make enough money to house, make enough money to pay 1,100 employees. But the way that we do that is by taking a problem-solving approach to different projects and bringing that entrepreneurial mindset of how can I grow, how can I solve problems, and how can I turn this into something that's profitable for not just me, but the people I'm serving as well.
Yeah. And that makes so much sense. I mean, Kristen, I'm thinking back to our conversation last summer where, you talked a lot about how one of the things that you think about is if a project is addressing a specific need, that that people will find value in it, right? I mean, which seems kind of like a no-brainer, but I think that a lot of the times when we set out with projects, we don't ask ourselves, is this fulfilling a certain need in whatever community that we're in? We see models for other projects and we say, well, I like that project, but the question is there a need for another of that project? And this kind of ties in, this is actually a really beautiful seg. Kristen, I love when you talk to me about kind of your trajectory following the end of your degree to where you are now with D'Addario. What would you tell, I mean, music students who are maybe finishing something like a performance degree and they've had a very performance-centric mindset, and then they're wanting to pursue something that isn't, a performance career or a tenure track position or just any collegiate teaching position? Like, how would you tell them to take those skills and apply them elsewhere?
Sure. Yeah. To kind of answer your question from the vantage point of serving needs, there's a couple different types of categories of needs that I tend to think about when I'm giving this kind of career advice. There are your own needs that you have as a musician, as an artist, and then there are needs of the community that you are supported by. Support could be fiscal, it could be relational, it could be educational. And it's important to be able to identify both types of needs, the ones that you have within yourself and the ones within your community. In order for me to be able to identify what needs I had as a creator, as a member of this field when I was getting out of school and considering different directions to go in with my career, I needed to go more fundamental than I want to be a college professor. I had to go down to the level of what compelled that desire to begin with, which for me was, a short list that I could track back through a lot of different moments in my childhood where, I felt the greatest. And when you can identify what that seedling is of what compels your commitment to an art, a community, whatever, then it becomes a lot easier to find fulfillment in a variety of different career paths. So that's a need you have for yourself. You'll always find a way to create resources, content, and maybe even eventually be profitable if you start to look outside of your own needs after a while and look at the broader community around you. So developing a sense of intellectual curiosity and then a sense of intellectual honesty about where that curiosity leads you will help you uncover all kinds of problems that you can help solve for your community and might end up also fulfilling you and sustaining you in a lot of ways as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something that, I mean, that's a skill set that I think we often neglect to address, that we don't realize that we have been cultivating for all these years of study with an instrument, is that we have been engaged regularly in projects, taking something from a beginning phase all the way to the completion, if you want to think of the performance as being the completion of the project. But then also, I mean, what we do is collaborative. It is inherently collaborative in nature. I mean, we cannot be performing artists in the vacuum. We have to engage with people. And so I think that even like just the more ways that we can view our musical training as being not inherently tied to just one domain, like the skills that we are developing, it are necessary across a multitude of fields, and that with a little bit of knowledge in any of those fields, we can jump domains and then find ourselves equally comfortable. At least that's how I'm, looking at my career where I want to go forward. That's the lens that I'm trying to view things through. It's good to see an affirmation, a head nod, so I'm glad I'm not just kind of tangentially going off. Nick, I want to switch over to you for just a moment. Um, just because I find, I love your musical output. I mean, I think that I've listened to Rushing Past Willow potentially more than any other saxophone album ever. Which I wouldn't say I listen to saxophone music all the time. I consume quite a bit of music, but I think just the listenability and just the ingenuity of that music. I mean, I continuously come back to that, and it's just so very refreshing. Um, so kind of the question I have for you is, I think that by the nature of the way we have training set up at a collegiate level, we have to engage with a canon or a body of works, and I think often that time we spend so much time on that music that we leave maybe not enough time or a less than desirable amount of time for students to find their own creative potential with music, whether that be like improvisation or, composition of their own pieces. How, like, what do you think is a way for us to kind of instill that curiosity? I mean, what was a tool for you that got you moving in that direction, and kind of gave you that agency?
Right. So first off, thank you. That's way too kind of you. And it means a lot, though, that the music resonates with you. So thank you for all of that. In terms of, the role of all of this stuff in a curriculum, I guess the first thing to mention is that this is a large discussion that is certainly taking place with accreditation with the National Association for Schools of Music, and what role entrepreneurship or career development plays in that, what role the canon takes in all of that. And I think it comes down to this question, are we preparing musicians for a job, or are we teaching art for art's sake? Where does research play into all of that? And that's a huge question, and I'm really just offering anecdotes on my end. I don't think I have the answers to all of that, but they're good questions to consider, the role of the university. I will say, on the topic of anecdotes, some things that were really useful for me. I think back, even in high school, I was fortunate to have a private teacher who, at the end of every lesson, we improvised, whether that was both on saxophone or he was on piano or guitar. I was on saxophone. Improvisation was something that was a pretty integral part of my practice routine. And I maintained that throughout. And it eventually became a huge part of my practicing. In fact, I can think when I was in France, when I was studying with Jean-Michel Goury, we were working on some pieces by like Francois Rosset, and to really graft those ideas, those sounds, he would have me, or I would improvise in the style of those compositions. So, I think I'm saying all of this because yes, we should practice our scales. We have to practice our repertoire. It's funny. I think the first things that go in our practice routine are some of the most critical things to having a career as a musician: being able to sight read, being able to improvise. So I think one thing is just incorporating those practices into our own practice routines. Going further, I like to think about the things that got me into saxophone to begin with, or some of the really key moments. And, of course, like many of us who are listening, who are in this discussion, thankful that I had people early on give me, I remember I was given like Claude DeLong's CD, I was given some of John Sampin's CDs early on, but I also remember digging through the library, being curious, like Kristen had said, that curiosity is really important, but I remember digging through the library and I just wanted solo saxophone recordings. And the first thing that I found was Anthony Braxton for alto. And I just thought, oh, it's for alto, great, it's a solo. I had no idea of who Anthony Braxton was at that time, but that was really important for me. I didn't understand that music at that time, though I knew there was something to it. But, having that curiosity to go and find these things at a formative level, that was important. I think for teachers, creating an environment that encourages that kind of curiosity is important. And then also bridging some of the unique aspects of our students. I think that's an important part when we teach too. And I say that because even younger, this is like very little Nick Zoulek, I was really into skating, like rollerblading and doing tricks and all of that. And there was a skate video that, you know, had all that stuff, but it also had Maceo Parker as a soloist. And I just thought, oh, rollerblading, I play the saxophone, these are great things. And then in my undergrad, I studied with Matt Sinchak, who was really into saxophone and video. At the time, he had a duo that did all of that stuff. And I just thought, oh, great, saxophone and video, and you know, all of these things, this improvising, this curiosity, making skate videos is what originally taught me how to use a camera and all of that stuff. But Matt was encouraging and combining, you know, all of these different things as an undergrad and doing these undergraduate research things. Fast forward, that all manifests in the projects that I do today, in the dissertation, which is on saxophone and video. So I guess the key thing is, yes, we should teach the canon. I mean, heck, I'm working on The Crook and all of that stuff right now. I love those pieces, but I think for teachers, leaning into those individual aspects that make our students special, I think that's an important thing. If students aren't sure what those things are, leaning into things like fostering core values, a mission statement, and, you know, big, hairy, audacious goals in our students, and finding stepping stones towards those. I think it's important to do that. So yes, we teach the canon, but I think there are some other things that we can foster as well.
Awesome. Dr. Evan, I want to jump to you now. And trying to make sure everyone gets like a question in, and then we'll kind of jump around maybe one more time as time allows, but I want to make sure we have a good chunk of time at the end for any questions that may filter in, which I already see one. But I think like with your work through Cleveland Uncommon Sound Project kind of being the model for this, I think there's often a pressure put on students to move to an area where there are resources available to them. You know, if I'm thinking about like if I was in like a rural environment, if I was in like at a regional university, or if that was more my home base, I've traveled for school and I'm coming back, you know, students may feel pressured to move from where they are to a place where there are a lot of resources centered, like maybe a major urban center. You know, what would you say as far as advice to students who are looking about starting a project like you've started in an area and they don't want to move? I mean, how would you encourage a student to find resources in the areas that they are and build a project that's meaningful without, you know, transplanting to a place that very likely has those resources, but you know, is already crowded and saturated as far as people clamoring for that material?
Sure, I'm happy to speak on that. So when I moved to Cleveland is an urban center, so maybe that's not the greatest example, but it doesn't have still the most robust new music scene, and that's something that Cleveland Uncommon Sound Project intended to do. And so I think it's grown a lot, and we've brought a lot of artists in, and we've cultivated a scene here in some way, and have some really consistent supporters of that. And we also have great funding through the state and through the county. So I think regardless of where you are, it's actually really easy to start a nonprofit and become incorporated and get 501c3 status. You could do that as an ensemble. I've never done that with any of my ensembles, but you could do that with some project that you think is going to really contribute to the art scene in your community. I think everyone values that. And if you can find, you know, really go out and meet people and build a community and go out and see what is out there, what already exists, who could you partner with? I think that's a great way to figure out also like what's missing in that area geographically and what you can contribute. That's also something really meaningful for you. That is something that can grow and develop with you. and finding people to team up with. But then I think state funding exists in most places. There's also county funding. Sometimes there's even, it depends on your community. Sometimes there are donors and people you can crowdfund more easily if you really build a community around what you're doing and partner with different organizations that have been there for longer than you. And that's something that CUSP, Cleveland Uncommon Sound Project, really did here. I mean, I spent 2 or 3 years here before starting CUSP and meeting people and figuring out what was missing, what we could contribute. And one of the main things we wanted to do was start a new music festival. And so figuring out, okay, what is that going to look like? How can that really benefit the city? Who's going to support that? And we found someone to help us get some grant money that was from a private foundation. And we really couldn't have gotten started without knowing that person and developing a relationship with that person. And just really collaborating in that way and taking the time to go out for coffee with people. I tend to keep pretty busy, and it was really hard to convince myself that it was worth the time of like spending that socialization time on my days where I wasn't teaching. But it really does pay off because you develop those relationships over time, and then people get to know your work. And I'm someone who really follows through with something that I want to do, and they realize that I'm going to do it if I say I'm going to do it. So they were much more likely to support what I was doing and what CUSP was doing in general. And so I think starting locally, even as a student, I get asked a lot like, well, how can I start performing off campus if I'm a student at college? Like, what do I do? Well, I say figure out where you could play in town, start hanging out more at whatever coffee shop looks like a nice venue, talk with the owner, figure out maybe they're interested in having, like twice a month they want music, and you can organize concerts. And that's a way to get started and get people to know you in town and get a resume, build up your resume in that way. Or if you're a member of a church or some other community like that. For me in Cleveland, actually, this is sort of an aside, but building an audience here, most of my friends have always been musicians. And so if you want people to come to your concert locally where you're at, it's really hard to get people to come out because your musician friends are also busy playing concerts on the same nights that you're playing concerts. So I joined a rock climbing gym. I got into rock climbing, and many of my audience members in the last year and a half have been people from my gym who also were like, wow, I didn't know this kind of music existed, and so it was a really great way to get people into that. So maybe they'll seek that out. And now that I'm leaving, they might still follow CUSP and still go to those events. That's still a possibility. So I think just finding non-musicians who can get behind what you're doing somehow. So if you have interests or hobbies outside of your instrument or music in general, I think that's a really important thing to cultivate also.
That actually takes me back to thinking about the NASA panel that we had and Kristen's comment, which actually it's funny. It like forever is seared in my memory in a very positive way. But your comment of at the end of the day, you got to be a good hang. And I think that sums it up so well. I mean, that sounds like, exactly what Dr. Evan was saying. And I know Nick has, echoed similar sentiments about you have to be someone who is approachable. You have to be someone who is reliable, amicable. And so let me use this as a seg really quickly then to just kind of field a question, both Noah to you and to Nick. You all both collaborate heavily with non-saxophonists. I mean, yes, you collaborate with saxophonists, but you also collaborate outside of saxophone quite a bit. Are there inherent barriers? Do you think that we as saxophonists are, what do we have to get past to have those really successful, equitable collaborations? Like, do you feel like that we're inherently bad at it, or, is there, what would your advice be to someone who is trying to move out of the things that are readily available, like, outside of school collaborations, outside of studio collaborations, that sort of thing?
You got it, no.
I just talked though. Okay. Again, I keep coming back to this whole thing of cultivating relationships and really figuring out, well, not really figuring out, but going out and doing things and meeting people. Again, I can use the example of going to the rock climbing gym. There are plenty of artists and like visual artists and musicians who I found at the gym just by talking to people. And I haven't collaborated with any of them yet, but I think just going out there and surrounding yourself and being open to new relationships with people, and going to festivals and workshops and signing up for things outside of your existing network. You know, because in school, for example, if I was to collaborate with composers, well, it just happened to be that where I went to grad school, and this is the case at a lot of places, that most of the composers, most of the student composers were cis white males. So it wasn't like a huge, you know, a very diverse population of composers. But that's who I started collaborating with because that's who I was around. And so if you're going to collaborate with the people that you know and who you surround yourself with, I think if you want to expand on that, then you have to seek people who have come from different backgrounds than you. And for me, that's been really enriching the more that I've expanded that network. And it wasn't something necessarily purposeful, just the more that I went to events and met more people, that just automatically expanded. And so for me, my recent multimedia project, for example, you know, has people from lots of different backgrounds, and it was really enriching to work with them because the project really had a lot of depth that I didn't expect, just because people really brought those backgrounds to that specific project. And that's not something I asked them to do, but it just happened. And so for me, I think it's just making sure that I'm surrounding myself with people who aren't like me, because I learned so much from them and from collaborating with them. And it's really inspiring to grow in that way. So I think for me, it's just like a way to grow as an artist and to offer people something that doesn't already exist. Because like if you're collaborating with two people who come from really different backgrounds than you, in whatever sense of the word that means, but like then you're just going to have a deeper you're going to have more to share, I think, than you would have by yourself. And so, you know, I still haven't collaborated a ton with non-musicians, so I'm mostly with composers, but also more recently with some video artists. And it's definitely something I want to do more, because people from different disciplines also have just the way they talk about art is similar enough, but also different, and can offer you like a new window into another world.
Right, I agree with all of that. One thing that I'd add on the idea of collaborating, especially when it's outside of music or when it's with different disciplines, I think it's important to learn as much as you can about that person's language, and in order to understand some of the hurdles that they might be overcoming, or just to try to speak the same language as them. So to give some examples, I've worked with Wild Space Dance Company for quite a while, first as a performer, then as a composer and performer, finally as their music director. And especially in the performance role, I mean, you know, working with dance and learning about dance is such a fascinating endeavor. But by the end, well, even I guess sort of in the beginning, I would be moving on stage with them as I was playing. And, you know, I found some of the most useful and beneficial things were doing warm-ups with them. Of course, I obviously could not do it like the yoga stuff as well as they could. I mean, that's incredible. But that's the thing too, being willing to fail, but to try and speak that language was really important. It also gives you a totally different level of respect for what these people are doing. I mean, it's great. A similar thing happened in my collaborations with video artists and with animators. And quite frankly, working with them is what led me to produce my own videos and produce videos for other people more seriously. But in doing so, like with animators, this was with Josh Simmons, who goes by Simsies, that's his artistic name. But I remember he created this animation for a piece of mine, Amplitude Hedron, and I was asking, it was like something that in my mind I thought was really minor. Can you just make the animation do this rather than this? But what I didn't understand is that's like a whole day of render time and changing like the algorithm behind the thing that was making the animation do that. So what to me seemed like, no, just make it go from here to here, was actually this astronomical amount of work. But, you know, in understanding that, you know, how to communicate, you know what you can do to help foster a better collaboration. We encounter that with composers too. I'm sure many of us have had the conversations about multiphonics, about extended techniques and figuring out how those work. But yeah, having that openness, being willing to give, being willing to listen, I think all of that helps to foster collaboration, especially with not musicians.
I just wanted to add one thing to that. So when I was talking about how there still isn't the largest new music community in Cleveland, it kind of forced me to work with people in other genres more. And that, like I wanted, you know, a lot of my friends are jazz musicians in Northeast Ohio, and they're some of the best humans I know. And I was like, okay, I just want to play with them. How do I do that? And so I formed a free improv trio with two of the jazz musicians, and then one of them asked me to play on his album. And so I'm finding myself playing like free jazz on this quasi funk tune, and it's going to be on an album. And that's something I never envisioned for myself. But the reason that happened was because I am surrounded by people, you know, in other genres. And so it stretched me to go outside of that. Whereas if I were in a city, you know, I'm going off topic here, but if I were in a city where there were tons of people playing the music that I would, you know, that I'm inclined to play, then it might not have expanded my own artistry in that way. And also there's a great experimental noise scene here. So I improvised a lot more than I expected to. And the audiences for that music, you know, also would want to go to a new music concert. So I think there are just, even within music, there's a way to meet people. And that's one way to expand, you know, to have more equitable collaborations too. You know, there are just different kinds of people who are playing jazz and noise music than there are playing contemporary classical music. So I think that's a great way to start if you're interested in expanding that way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. I appreciate that from both of you. Yeah, I'm seeing questions pop up in the Zoom group chat, so and they're probably going to be quite involved. So I want to just ask one more question to you all that are questions that I have kind of come up with prior to this, and then we should go ahead and start fielding questions. But this is directed to Jess, Kristen, and Noah. You know, as three incredible female identifying individuals who have made, you know, places for yourself, and in some ways places made places for yourselves where there was no model, there was no pre-existing model for your type of career, or, you know, another female identifying individual who could serve as a mentor, a role model, a guide. What advice would you give to those individuals as they're trying to carve a space for themselves or use their skills in what, you know, undeniably is still a male-centric field?
Kristen, you want to jump first?
Sure, yeah. A very big, important question, Kyle. Thank you. You know, I think that there's a lot of leadership principles that can intersect with my answer a little bit, but if I had to narrow it down to one or two ideas, I would say to focus on either the project or the problem. And in the focus on a project or a problem that you've either identified or you've been tasked to come up with a solution. Going beyond curiosity a little bit, once you understand what the project is that you bring to it or create, being honest with oneself about what is required, and then making sure that you stay the course on that solution that has been identified is probably the most important thing. So intellectual honesty, I would say. When we take the data that's given to us and we bring the element of honesty to it, then it makes it a lot easier to have the confidence to be able to point something out to a larger, perhaps resistant group that you might be with. And so long as you're focused on that project, the problem, the data, and the honest solution, then gender and influence and experience even sometimes doesn't take the front of the conversation. It's the work that's gone into cultivating that that very well-rounded view of what it is that you've been tasked to accomplish. What about you, Jess?
Oh. Yeah, I was going to say, I guess one of us should jump in, shouldn't we? I think for me, within everything, like a important strain that shows up all the time is basically, I found that not waiting for someone to give me permission to do something is one of the best ways that I can actually get something off the ground. You know, if I'm waiting for someone to either give me permission to do it or say, yeah, like that's a great idea, or if I'm assuming that someone else is going to help me along the way, or like open a door for me, or open a gate for me, then I miss out on the things that I really want to do. And so, you know, I think kind of in line with Kristen too, like getting a really clear understanding of what it is that you want to do, and who you are, and where you are in the space, and like owning that, and then not waiting for permission from other people to get started. You know, there's some statistics that I'm not going to get the exact number here, but even for things like applying for a job that you really, really want, that maybe, you know, doesn't quite line up with the exact things that you have, as a woman, typically women tend to wait until they're like 96% qualified to apply for a job. On the flip side, men tend to wait until they're 40%. So, you know, I think that being a little more bold and just kind of going for things, the worst that can happen is that nothing happens. So, you know, again, not waiting for that permission to say, hey, like, yeah, I've got that 96% readiness for whatever this project is. Actually be okay with starting at 40% and building it as you go. Whether that's a project or a career, or, you know, anything that you're trying to build, I think it's okay to start before you're ready, because you're going to learn so much in the process.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that a little bit, I think I'm always going to come back to relationships with people. Surround yourself with people who empower you. I think that's so, so important. Like whether they're male or female identifying, it really doesn't matter who they are. But as long as they really boost you up and encourage you and support you, then you're more likely to feel sort of invincible and convinced of your own ideas. I think it's hard as an artist, especially, we get stuck in our own heads about our projects or what we're trying to achieve. And it's difficult as a musician. We're constant critics of ourselves. And so I think it's really important to talk about your aspirations to the people around you and make sure you're around people that are cheering you on all the time. But in the end, you really have to be your own cheerleader. And I think just going for things, and you'd be surprised how much you are going to succeed if you keep applying for things and submitting proposals, because you're also going to learn from the process. So just keep doing things, don't stop doing things, and just be ready to fail all the time. But through all the failures, like, you're going to have successes. But if you don't apply for anything because you're too worried, then nothing's going to happen. So like really taking things into your own hands. So like getting that support system, but then becoming your own supporter. I mean, you have to be your biggest supporter. No one's really going to do that. So
yeah, if you aren't looking out for you, then no one else is going to.
Yeah, I mean, it's like obvious advice, but it's really hard to actually live it. You know, it took me till I was like in my 30s. So, you know, just I think I finally learned my lesson, but it took a while. And you know, in grad school, I would see how confident some of my male colleagues were, and I just was shocked at how confident they were. And I was like, okay, well, I have to figure out how to do that, because, you know, I don't think they're necessarily more qualified than I am. I just think that they're somehow more confident, and, you know, you have to develop that within yourself, and it takes time. So start now.
Yeah.
Well, I will do what I did not do at the NASA talk, which is actually make time for questions. That was the expectation I put on myself for this. So I'm gonna start with the one that's just kind of closest at the bottom of the chat. I'm sure you all can see it, but I'll read it out loud, just in case there's anyone who can't see this. This is from the Zoom group chat, from Dr. Frigo. Can you each describe a project that is a true highlight for each of you, something that meets your deepest artistic and humanistic values, as well as your own definition of success?
I feel like I've seen that question, like when it popped up, and I've been like, "What is that?" Sitting here really thinking about it. I can start if you want. For me, it's when I get to work with young musicians and help support them as they're building their careers or their ventures or whatever it is that they have that big idea about. That's the thing that really lights me up, and that's something I've learned from teaching. The thing that really, about the thing I love about teaching is that you see a student develop over time, and you get to see that spark, and you get to see them really grow. And as I've grown myself and realized my strengths and the things that I really love, I get so much joy out of working with other musicians to help get their project off the ground. I'll be working with people, and I'll come out of my chats out of my office and just kind of like run around the house like, this is so cool, I love this, and I love their idea, and like I'm so excited to see it come up and to do that. And so I found that for me that's been so fulfilling, and it's inspiring for me as an artist because it helps me push myself in my projects, and then to also to see people really grow with theirs. That's the thing that I get really giddy about, and it's been super fun doing that with my students this semester as well. They've all come up with their own businesses, and it's been really great to see them do their presentations. It's been on video this semester, but that's what really lights me up and makes me feel like I can really be me in the process.
I'll jump in if that's all right. I like that question a lot. And I especially like that last part, the definition of success. Personally, I try to have a growth mindset in everything that I'm doing. Everything is, yes, there are projects and there are ending points of those projects. And there's a time to put those projects out, and there might be, some fear about putting that out in different ways, but it's important to conquer that. But in the end, it's about growth. It's about looking at where you're at and evaluating and judging all of that stuff. So as long as I'm growing in those projects, I would consider it to be a success. In terms of things that highlight some of my deepest values. Well, one thing that I'd like to bring up that I'm very proud of with 8th Blackbird, just last week, there was a Giving Tuesday Now event, which was essentially Giving Tuesday, which occurs, after Thanksgiving usually, but considering the situation, that we're doing it now. And as a nonprofit-based organization, of course, we think, well, it's time to fundraise. But looking at that, we had the discussion, do we fundraise for the ensemble? Is that really, who we are? In our mission, we say we're a community-based organization. So rather than doing what seemed to be, the obvious thing, let's fundraise, instead, we tried to identify groups that were important to us, and use our platform as a way to raise some money. We went for breadth rather than depth, and we were able to solicit donations from our board, from our donors, and match donations that then came in from other people, and we were really happy to do that. On a more personal artistic level, it will be Enter Branch, which is an album that I'm working on. It's a follow-up to the one that you mentioned, Kyle, Rushing Past Willow. And that brings in a more collaborative voice with people from all kinds of different genres. It was funny hearing Noah talk about, going into the studio, especially with other kinds of music outside of saxophone land. It's so inspiring, and you learn so much, and it's the best thing to just go in with that open mindset. It's one of my favorite things, actually, to then and some of my best friends now are either engineers or producers or people who are not saxophonists, and to just be a student. You know, I don't know, we have all the people in this chat, we have these things, these values that we share in saxophone, this history that we share, these pieces. But it's so funny because when you go into that studio with other musicians, none of that stuff really matters anymore. You know, you could be a nerd and talk about saxophone, and I don't mean that to sound too negative. That's an important thing, and it's something I care about. But it's good to be open and to learn about others. So anyway, to answer Connie's question, proud of that initiative with Dave's Blackbird from last week and going forward. Really excited for this Interbranch collaborative album video project.
I guess I'm last. Yeah. Yeah, Jess, I've been trying to think about this question too. I've been doing this, I can now say, long enough that it's hard to pick one that is the most special. There's been a lot of amazing projects that I feel really fortunate to have worked on. You know, back to this idea of understanding what core definitions of success look like for people, as Connie asked, what project has touched you in the most deepest artistic and humanistic way? I would say that once I identified that my fundamental need was to empower people, just hard stop, empowerment. It made it a lot easier to find the ability to do that with every single project that I tackled at D'Addario. And I would say that the one that I still probably feel the most proud about is the creation of the D'Addario Woodwinds Method Program, which is a program that supplies basically contracted agreements to various high-level players and influencers in their communities to be able to go into different environments and provide people with a tactile opportunity to try a product. I really, really like being able to find ways to get people paid. That's a really, really wonderful feeling to be able to support the community that has collectively raised me, has collectively raised all of us in a lot of ways. And so my definition of success now, I would say 10 or so years into my career, is different than what it was when I was in school. When I was in school, it was very, you know, it was very much in my own mind, and it was internal, it was personal. Success now that I've had the opportunity to embrace collaborations, as this wonderful panel has talked at length about, is measured by how many people are successful because of it. How many people are touched by your contribution to that. That's true success, is the number of people that can share in it. And so, you know, keep collaborating, keep saying yes before no to different things, just as everybody has talked about, you know, being curious, being willing to put yourself out there, to be bold, as Jess said. It's the surest way to success that I have found.
I'll jump in here. I guess my most recent multimedia solo project, that's a long-term commissioning project called Atomic, where I've so far commissioned 4 composers for. That is my first big solo project that I put together, and it just came from the idea of wanting to explore themes of human connection, and that's a really broad theme, but it's been amazing to see which topics people have chosen. And for me, the purpose of it was to delve into technology and challenge myself to work with technology more, because I was curious what that would do. And most of the performances I gave were me being on stage for a full hour nonstop and having to perform an hour length, like no applause in the middle kind of show. And that was a personal challenge. And I guess for me, success is just continuing to push myself artistically and try new things. and see what happens without really any expectations, and allowing myself the freedom to do that. And as long as I keep doing that, for me, that's a success. But also bringing this project to a few different universities and continuing to do that just to show students what their options are, in addition to learning the standard works for saxophone, depending on where they are. Maybe they're already doing projects like this, but just seeing that they can really do that. They can collaborate with other people, and that they can create their own adventure, essentially. So it's been fun to hear reactions from students, and also community members at various venues that I've played this at. But I think for me, exploring that particular theme that kind of came out of the 2016 presidential election, and also pushing myself performatively and then getting feedback from people, I think that's been one of my more meaningful projects.
Awesome. This is a question from Allison, again from Zoom. What's more important, having X, Y, or Z particular external skills? If so, what are they? Or having X, Y, or Z particular traits in your personality? If so, what are they? She, of course, is presuming that this varies for each of us.
Noah, you should go first so I don't forget you again.
We'll go reverse order.
I keep going last, so then I don't want to talk first, and then okay, well, I haven't had much time to think about it. Okay, so I think it's finding a balance between those things. I think that like externally speaking, for me, it's been helpful to be very organized and be able to like logistically carry out the projects that I've carried out. And that may sound simple, but the more practice you get at like creating timelines and deadlines, I think that's an important thing for any artist who wants to be an entrepreneur and wants to organize their lives, because no one's dictating that for them. So you have to, and I think that for many artists who are very like creative people, time and like deadlines are not like their forte. So I think finding ways to develop that, if that's something that you're not particularly good at, for starters, I think is really important. And then in terms of personality traits, as a collaborator, I will say like I've had to train myself to be more patient and to be more open to other people, not to other people's ideas, but to flexibility. Like I'm kind of a control freak, and so it's been hard to let go at times and like trust the people I'm with if I don't know them that well, and just like let things, like take the time to let things develop and not feel stressed by lack of control or the unknown. So I think for me, I think that's a really important trait for any collaborator or someone who wants to be creative, and that's something that I've struggled with, and I'm still working on it. So yeah.
So if I can jump in on that one, having been in a quartet with Noah, there are times when I really appreciated that, when we didn't have that passage down and I was ready to go for it. It's like, nope, we are only moving 4 beats per minute up. And so I don't know, sometimes it's a good thing. But it's, yeah, but in terms of personality traits, it's a great question. I think you could call it grittiness, or you could call it long-term problem solving, and I guess they're two different things, but the ability to keep, persevering even when there are those challenges in place. I mean, there are so many books on this, about talent, about grit, and they're all really wonderful. So that idea of grittiness is great. Long-term problem solving, understanding that, having the patience to understand that a problem, you might not be able to take care of it right away. This might be a longer thing, and to continue to chip away at it or have a thought experiment where, you continue to work on this thing. Some other things that I think are important personality traits, a little bit of subversiveness, I think is okay. I don't mean to totally overthrow the system, but I think it's okay to, try something different, and to have a little bit of fun with that too. I mean, why not try some things? And actually, I wanted to just circle back to one other thing with the long-term problem solving. I'm going to put it a way that a mentor of mine puts it. 10-year plans are good, 5-year plans are good too, but 2 years. The way that this person posted to me was, in 2 years we're going to have this conversation again, and you're going to tell me what you're most proud of in those 2 years. And we had this meeting, and then a month later I met with him and we talked about this. But I like that way of thinking about things. 2 years is a manageable amount of time, but to say what you're most proud of, I don't know. I just think that's a useful and easy way to think about it. So I don't know, that's getting a little abstract from Allison's question, but I hope that those topics answer it.
I guess it's me and Kristen next. I can jump in because Allison said X, Y, and Z. I've been like, what's my top 3? I really think that for me, the idea of personality traits are going to be the thing that I'm going to focus on here, because one of the biggest personality traits that I really think is so useful and so beneficial is to develop the sense of self-determination, because that's going to then enable you to develop any skills that you need along the way. I think that having the confidence in yourself and having that commitment to really, I'm going to do what it takes to get to where I need to get to. I think that that's really valuable, and it almost enables you to do so much more, because you have that confidence in yourself that, I don't know how to do that right now, but I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to learn how to do that. So, for me, that's one of the big 3, if I was to actually take this literally and do 3. I love what everyone else is saying about curiosity. I think that curiosity and playfulness, being able to be okay with experimentation and not taking everything so to heart all the time. I think that if something fails, it doesn't mean you're a terrible person. And actually where we all probably agree with this, failing is important, and the faster you recover from a failure, the faster you're going to get to that next failure, and then it's going to keep going and going until eventually something works. And for most of us, I think that we all fail so many more times than anyone else ever sees. And, I think that the faster we can rebound from a fail, the faster we can then discover the thing that it was meant to be, or it was moving towards, or, it's okay to start something and then be like, actually, that was a terrible idea, and then pivot. I think that that's really valuable, and that's where that playfulness comes in. If you can just be like, that's interesting, as opposed to, I'm the worst, then there's not that personal stake in there. And I think that that's really helpful. And then I also think one other big thing is balancing risk-taking with being risk-averse. There are definitely times to be a risk-taker, but then at the same time, you have to temper that with being a little bit risk-averse on the side of it, so that you don't actually completely just take risks and then disappear. I think that there is a balance to be struck there, and I think that taking risks is really important. But mitigating those risks, doing everything that you can to make sure that when you take that risk, it's not going to be the worst thing that's ever happened to you if it fails. I think that's really important. So for me, it's that balance that I think is really driving with the being a risk taker. I think it's kind of both. But yeah, that's 3. So I'm going to stick with 3, and then I think Kristen's up.
Hey, all right. Yeah, having been the fortunate one to have a little bit more time to think about this, I think that the most important skills that I can think of in this moment, I actually had to spend a lot of time working on them because they didn't necessarily come to me naturally. One is to assume innocence in other people, to cultivate a sense of trust in others that might not necessarily be earned first, to assume that people are going to be open to your ideas and that they're going to be willing to work with you in some way. Assuming innocence, and kind of tangential to this idea is the skill set of leading with grace instead of wisdom. When I was earlier on in my career, D'Addario sent me to leadership training because I was a little bit of a bull in a china shop. I didn't always lead with grace, and there were several uncomfortable moments in meetings, and people had to ask me to dial down the righteousness a little bit. So cultivating the skill of just always remembering that you're on the other side of an entire other life and mind and set of circumstances. So I would say personality traits that are similar to those ideas is an empathic personality, the trait of empathy, being able to demonstrate to others that you're willing to hear them and listen to them and be on the receiving end of feedback from a completely other mind. Think of all that we deal with in our own lives and how chaotic and just vortex-ish our minds are. Whenever you're receiving information from other people, they're dealing with the exact same thing in their own right. So try to lead with grace instead of wisdom, and find empathy for those that you're trying to collaborate with.
So this is as far as like the Zoom group chat questions that we have. Alexia, do we have any questions from Facebook in that chat that I do not see? Okay, no Facebook questions as of now. That's awesome. Well, we've spent about an hour doing this. I'm happy to continue on if we would like to continue on. I have a couple of more questions for you all. If you feel like that would be a good use of your time. I promise that they're not exhausting questions, but I do want to make sure that we did open a space and create a space to have a conversation with those listening. One that I want to kind of jump back to with Jess really quickly, because I know that we're talking a lot about career diversity, is looking at your work with teaching. I think a lot of times we get caught up on the notion that we spend a lot of time showcasing the work of teachers that's done at a high level, but then students have to come from a place. They have to be taught before they can reach the university college level and that training that goes in there. What would you say to someone, obviously, like having spent time now I have in Texas and seeing the infrastructure that's available there for private teaching, you not only taking advantage of that infrastructure, but also building your own network. What would you say to someone who, they feel like their calling is pre-college teaching and the amount of work that takes? What would you say to someone who's trying to build that network in a place that maybe doesn't have the same infrastructure as a state like Texas?
Yeah, there's a lot in that. There's a lot in that question.
Sorry.
No, I think that I've taught pre-collegiate students here in the States, and also in my home in Australia, and I think that it's going to be different wherever you live. There's going to be different kinds of infrastructure. There's going to be different kinds of opportunities and all of those things. I think that honestly, jumping off of what we've all been talking about is reach out and like networking with the people in the community and understand the community that you're going to be in. I think that Noah talked about that actually for the ensembles that she was talking about, and you have to understand the community that you're going into. If you're coming into Texas, you have to understand the marching band is a thing that you're going to be competing with. If you're going to be, for me in Colorado, I understood the town. Unfortunately, it wasn't a big town to really dig into, but had we stayed there longer, I had plans to kind of train the community to understand what it was that I was going to be doing. So, the big challenge in that town in particular was that people just don't take lessons. They don't know what it is. They don't want to have to pay for that. It's one of the lowest socioeconomic cities in the country. And so I knew that the challenge there would be, one, to actually get people to pay for the work that I do and for them to also understand the value of it. So, if we hadn't moved to Austin, where I was, building my studio now, or had been at the time, my plan was to actually just start to look into how can I insert myself into the community and serve people and train them to understand how this works. And so for me, that was starting a saxophone group. Once a week, let's all just meet together, and everyone pays like $5 to come in. Then it's a little bit of cash to help with my time. Hopefully, as it grows, it's more and more per hour. But getting them used to the idea of the transaction of I'm getting education for a fee, and that this is in addition to the band programs that I'm having, my band classes with. So I think that wherever you go, you have to understand the community around you, understand their needs, understand the socioeconomic world that they're coming from, understand the history of the place. Like, the more you can get to know your audience, which I think is the same with everything in business and in entrepreneurship and in music, like, the better you can understand your audience, the better you can serve them, which then in turn allows you to thrive. And I think that we're also in this really interesting time where we're all now able to access things like Zoom. So how many people are now researching how to actually continue this beyond? Like, there are so many people right now looking at how can I be the best teacher online? How can I enhance my students' learning this way? How can I keep some of this? How can I get away from Zoom as far as I can and throw my computer into the trash? Like, everyone's trying to adapt to this, and there's no reason why this can't be part of a strategy for a private lesson teacher who's in a remote location that doesn't have a lot of people in town to draw from. So I think, again, like, getting to know the environment so well, and then also looking at how can you fit that, how can you serve that, and then also maybe what else can you do to supplement that if that isn't enough. I don't think there should be limitations based on location anymore. We're learning that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just want to thank you all so much for your time, for everyone who gave their time as far as tuning in, and offered that time to us for this discussion, which I think is obviously an important discussion, but also thank you to all of you all who decided to be on the panel. Again, the whole idea behind this was that we are highlighting the incredible work that's being done, that is on the periphery of what's happening in academia. So we have that as a very visual career option. We see the work of teachers, we see the work of performers. How can we sort of raise the rest of these career paths up the sides, and how we can show the incredible occupational diversity that's happening, that obviously you all represent significant parts of with the work that you're doing. And so again, I just want to thank all of you all for being generous with your time, and of course everyone for tuning in today.
Thank you for having us, Kyle.
Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, stay safe, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. I learned so much from all of you as well. What an incredible privilege it is to talk with you all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Cool.